Cedar Point is once again about to get one of the biggest investments ever in the park's history. Cedar Point's last major coaster was built this year in 2025 as a last-minute addition, and I think what they have planned for their next coaster will shock you. Cedar Point never fails to disappoint when it comes to adding new coasters, and I think the next coaster the park gets will be the most expensive coaster the park has gotten in over 20 years. I think the next coaster the park gets will also be a very thought out addition, and it may take a lot longer to come than some of us want or expect. Cedar Point's next coaster is going to be epic, and there's a pretty big chance it could even overtake Steel Vengeance as the best coaster at the park. Cedar Point has been building record breakers for decades already, but the last major Groundup coaster the park opened that was actually planned for the park and properly fit was Valverin, the B&M dive coaster they opened in 2015. Since then, the park RMC'd their old wooden coaster Mean Streak, turning it into Steel Vengeance in 2018, got a family coaster, redid Top Thrill Dragster, and plopped down a random Vekoma tilt coaster as an apology for delaying Top Thrill 2. What's interesting here though is it's been almost a decade with no new pre-planned, properly fit ground-up roller coasters at the park that is nicknamed the roller coaster capital of the world. There are many factors that cause Cedar Point not to get a major planned ground-up coaster for this long, but it's safe to say that they'll be getting a major new ground-up coaster very soon after Sirens Curse, and you won't believe how insane this new coaster will really be. When Cedar Point was planning their most recent major coaster, they did not expect Top Thrill Dragster to end up in a massive accident, causing the ride to need major modifications. In fact, they likely had a total different coaster planned for the park. When Top Thrill Dragster had its accident though, Cedar Point had to make a major decision. They were able to fix up the coaster, making it an even longer and more reliable ride, but that would cost a lot of money. The cost of redoing Dragster would likely be close to the cost of opening a new standalone coaster. Cedar Point had to choose between fixing Top Thrill Dragster or opening the major new coaster they'd originally intended to open. The park decided to go ahead with the revamp of Top Thrill Dragster, but it would be branded as a new coaster, pushing back the park's previous plans for any major new investments. Then the worst case scenario happened and Top Thrill 2 was barely open during its opening year, operating just 6 days before closing for the season. When the chain got a chance to purchase another park's canceled Vekoma tilt coaster for a discounted price, they decided to put it at Cedar Point as an apology for Top Thrill 2 not opening as planned. Sirens Curse doesn't really fit perfectly at the park, and the location of the ride as well as its color scheme don't really fit either. The ride is located right next to the park's orange B&M dive coaster, and it definitely is quite strange. Cedar Point never planned for this to be their next major coaster, and they definitely have something big in the works. Cedar Point will need to open a major coaster very soon after having no major, fully new, originally planned coasters open at the park since Steel Vengeance in 2018. Top Thrill 2 is a great addition and no doubt will be a very popular attraction, but it's not really a major new coaster, especially not for Cedar Point standards. That disaster led to Sirens Curse, which isn't really a properly fit and planned auto addition either. Definitely not the way Cedar Point normally does their additions. 2025 is the year Sirens Curse opens, and hopefully Top Thrill 2 as well. So the park definitely won't be getting anything major in 2026. 2027 and 2028 also likely won't bring a new coaster to Cedar Point, as Kings Island will likely be getting a new coaster one of those years, and the two Ohio parks rarely get major investments the same year. That's why everything points to Cedar Point getting an insane major new ground-up coaster for 2029, and this new coaster is gonna be epic. There are a few obvious options for Cedar Point's next coaster. Some of these are more likely than others, but none of them are anything special, and none of them will be that major insane record breaker I think Cedar Point is looking for. Still though, these are possible options, so I'll go through them quickly. The most likely of these options is a Dueling GCI wooden coaster. This has been predicted for Cedar Point for a long time, and it would be a great addition. A major wooden coaster could do great things for this park, and it's long enough after the park opens Steel Vengeance that it wouldn't seem like two wooden coasters in a row to the GP. A wooden coaster isn't the major record-breaking thrill coaster Cedar Point desperately needs, so I don't think this is the most likely option for the park's next coaster. If it is the park's next coaster, then I think it may come a year earlier in 2028. Another option I can see is a massive B&M surf coaster. Cedar Point has always been a big fan of B&M, and they may very well be interested in opening one of the first and best B&M surf coasters. By 2029, the surf coaster will already be a couple of years old and may already be very popular, so this is a very possible option for Cedar Point's next coaster. That being said, a surf coaster also isn't the major record breaker I think Cedar Point needs, and it hasn't been so successful thus far. That's why I think it's not the most likely option for their next coaster. Another option that's been floated around lately is the idea that Cedar Point will open a B&M Giga Coaster bigger and better than Fury 325 at Carowinds. While anything is possible, I don't see the park wanting to open another Giga Coaster when they already have one, especially since B&M Giga Coasters come with a hefty price tag. It is a possible option, though not a likely one in my opinion. Before I get to the incredible coaster I think is most likely for Cedar Point to open next, I really want to thank you all for taking the time to watch my videos. If you enjoy my content, it would mean the world to me if you could subscribe. It takes just a second on your end, but it really means a lot to me. One of the more likely options I can see for Cedar Point's next coaster is a RMC TRex. I think the first TRex will debut in 2027, so 2029 is already long enough after that for Cedar Point to potentially have a go at one. So RMC has begun development again on a new version of a TRex, and though it may not be as crazy as originally expected, it's definitely more realistic now. They could build a massive 300 to 400 foot coaster that is more insane than any coaster we've ever seen. It could be airtime focused, but could also include inversions, thereby differentiating it from the park's Giga Coaster Millennium Force. Cedar Point has to open an insane TRex eventually, and 2029 could totally be that time. I don't know if new Six Flags will be willing to work with RMC though, and there's another insane coaster that is a little bit closer to reality that I think is even more likely to be the park's next coaster. Vekoma has been everywhere lately, and their coasters truly look awesome. Vekoma family coasters are all the rage now, and maybe Cedar Point wants to get their hands on one. Maybe they want to get something like Big Bear Mountain in a 2-coaster deal from Vekoma, with the second coaster being an insane new generation Vekoma flying coaster. I'd honestly love to see this, and maybe they could even incorporate a lawn chair. If Intamin is back in the chain's good graces by 2029, which is a big if, I think we could potentially see something from them. Some sort of larger launch coaster that's different enough from Maverick could be a great option. After seeing how awesome Stardust Racers is though, I can't help but wonder if Cedar Point will call up Mack Rides for an insane launch coaster for the 2029 season. It would definitely be a great addition and would fit like a glove in the park's lineup if they do it right. The most likely coaster I think Cedar Point could open next in 2029 is a Mack Extreme Spinner. I don't even have to say anything else. This coaster is just the perfect fit at the park. The company works with Mack Rides, their coasters are reliable, and the Extreme Spinner is one of the most beloved and most rare coasters in the world. If Cedar Point built a massive extreme coaster the right way, it could even become the best coaster at the park, and possibly the best coaster in the entire world. If I was a betting man, I'd say Cedar Point will 100% get this if Kings Island doesn't get it first. But there's a good chance Kings Island does get it first. Kings Island hasn't seen a new thrill coaster since 2020 though, and with the park going almost 6 years with no major coaster, it begs the question. Did Kings Island move down on the new Six Flags company's priority list? Is the new Six Flags neglecting Kings Island? I have an entire video on this topic, and believe it or not, Kings Island is actually in a pretty interesting situation, as you'll find out when you click the video on screen now.